further denigrating the function of Orisa leaders. The music industry serves as a counter critique used as a medium to address and attack social ills. The calypso genre or genre rendered by various icons have addressed the taboo of Orisa in their works in a time when this spiritism installed fear into citizens by a far greater extent than now. Singers such as Robert Nelson, known as Lord Nelson, Andre Tanker, David Rudder, Ella Andel, Hollis Liverpool, known as Chalkdust, Michael Osuna, known as Sugar Aloes, and Sandra Mellington, known as Singing Sandra, has all paid homage to the Orisa in various calypsos, usually beginning with a chant and used as a chorus. These calypsos not only condemned and highlighted problems within society's framework, but also illustrated a pride in the Orisa and ancestrality. Respondents noted Orisa and West African ancestrality impacted Trinidad's culture. 60%, this would of course have been from a survey, 60% identify the steel drum hailing from the Orisa yards, which support Fulami's point on the national instrument, emerging from Ogun worship and drumming, tying Trinidad's percussion to Orisa. The practice of dubstep or grunting as a result of the African hymns being prohibited during colonization, to which songs were hummed at ceremonies, produced the beats for calypso and soca, also outlined by Adam Pascal in The Guardian, which reiterates that Orisa's influence on various music genres. However, the griot or chantwell concept of Kaiso and Calypso was not recognized among the interrogated, showing a possible portrayal of the lack of knowledge on the topic. Calypso, like folklore, sprouted from orality, with the lack of written literature in West Africa before European invasion. Traditions were transmitted to younger generations by griots through conversations, dance, and song. And also here, I would like to come out of the reading a little bit and point out that music and dance has, for the longest of time and history, has always been a part of African culture. Because music and song and that type of activity was the mode by which education took place. Ceremonies, celebrations also took place around the music and the dance and the singing. But these practices were in fact the medium of education for the society. So it was not just purely a matter of entertainment. All right, so I would go back into the reading now. Apart from storytelling, griots brought into context Creolized chantwells who sang during fieldwork and slave celebrations, extending their role to criticizing colonizers and addressing issues of religion, sex, hefty labor, and obscene entertainment, all of which began Kaiso during that time. Griot, which would be male or female storytellers. All right, and they give a couple of examples here. They talk about Bro Anansi or Bri Anansi, the sly spider, thought of in infant books. Mama Delay, right, and Mama Dilo, which would be half woman and half snake, protectress of the rivers and consort of Papa Boa. And Papa Boa, of course, which we all know, is the guardian of the forest. All right. There are a couple, during my research, I came across a couple of books. One of them was written by a Tobagonian author by the name of J.D. Elder. And in his books, he went extensively into providing research information concerning the folk songs that were sung in Tobago, the ones that were of African origins, the ones that were of French origin. He goes quite a lot into the development of the Kalinda music, which basically is one of the predecessors to Calypso. Right? I'm going to read here a little bit about some of the developments of the masquerade. Carnival's masquerade has been significantly influenced by Orisa culture, though disputed that it is mainly the product of European customs. Orisa leader Olodari Masatunji highlighted in his bid to create an Orisa carnival in 2001 called To Meet the need to revitalize carnival by introducing its lost sacredness and Orisa connectivity. All right, this is written in a document written by an author by the name of Henry on page 186 and 87. This point relates to African and Creole participation in carnival in the 1800s, bringing their folklore and traditions to life in old mass. Characters such as the Jab Jab, the Moko Jambi, embodying malevolent spirits, are residual features of West African spirituality that links the Orisha and Kabbalah observed by bats, dragons, and the midnight robber. These things could be found in a book written by our author, Lum, where he goes deeply into a lot of the Orisha tradition. I may like to add, even though it is mentioned here, some of these characters here, like the bats and the dragons and the midnight robber, and I think there was people used to play cow also. But I think some of these characters that exist in the old mass would have also been totems that were associated to specific Yoruba tribes. Okay, because certain animals are considered to be sacred to particular tribes of Yoruba traditional practitioners. All right, that is just to interject. All right. In conclusion, for the most part, a chronological timeline has been constructed to reveal the evolution of the Orisha faith in Trinidad, beginning in Africa to the Caribbean. Its mingling with other religions, the forms of discrimination it encountered, and its indelibly etched footprint with various Trinidadian cultural art forms, all of which exudes the unbounded dynamism of this creolized spiritual practice. The fear of musical oppression was also a great concern during the American Calypso craze in the 1950s with Harry Belafonte, which was similarly accused of forcing his musical interest onto Trinidadian musical culture by singing and recording the calypsos of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, I'm going to go into another part that deals with the history of labor in Trinidad, and it shows the importance that the art form of calypso played in resistance in the history of Trinidad. It would also seem, because of the colonial domination, that the African styles of music and art form would have always played some sort of role in revolutionary activities, as the slaves were never happy to be slaves. And then, of course, with other Africans coming in as free people, they would, of course, been briefed and well informed about the experience of those who were actually slaves in the colony of Trinidad. All right, resistance to slavery was endemic among the enslaved population in the Caribbean. The method through which the enslaved Africans resisted slavery included grand and petty maroonage, armed revolt and rebellion, gynecological resistance, feigning illness and laziness, damaging property, poisoning both the master and themselves, retaining the African religion and cultural practice, writing letters and memoirs, as well as giving oral testimonies to commissions of inquiry. The enslaved Africans were crucial in the fight for emancipation, as they played a large role in freeing themselves. All right, this was from a document that could be seen on the government website for the archives. Right, this would have came from an emancipation handout. Right, the name of the document would have been "Sold into Slavery." I'm going to read another quote from that document. Tobago, in the year 1770, marked the beginning of an 11-year period in the history of Tobago, which is characterized by numerous armed revolts by the enslaved African population. From 1770 to 1801, 6 armed revolts took place on the island. One revolt, led by an enslaved named Sandy in 1770, I think for whom Sandy Point is named. 2 armed revolts in 1771, one in June and the other in August. 1 revolt in 1773, in 1774, and in 1801. These revolts were not concentrated in one specific area of the island, and in some instances, such as the 1773 revolt, it was an island-wide event. Okay, so of course, the Africans were never happy slaves. So this is part of the history of what took place in Tobago. Now I'm going to come to Trinidad here. There was a revolt in St. Joseph in 1837, which was led by a gentleman by the name of Donald Stewart, who was popularly known as Daga. He was a former African chief in Guinea and the leader of the 1st British West India Regiment. In the early morning of June the 18th in 1837, the revolt broke out when approximately 250 of Daga's men assaulted the barracks of the white officers. By daybreak, however, many of the mutineers surrendered and Daga himself was taken into custody. Daga and his remaining compatriots were sentenced to death by a firing squad on the 1st of August and on the 16th of August in 1837. Now, I've read other documents that says differently to them being executed by a firing squad. From my research, I've seen documents that said they were hung. But anyway, I'm just going with what the archives had in their brochure, right, or in the handout. After that revolt in 1837, which more or less would have been like an internal military rebellion sort of a way, I guess because of probably discrimination, but then that's just an assumption. But Let me read. Tobago was prosperous until its sugar industry was weakened by the abolition of slavery. A hurricane, the decline of the West Indian sugar in general, and the Belmania riots. When Tobago was amalgamated with Trinidad in 1888, the laws of Trinidad were extended to the smaller island, and after a period, the revenues of the two islands were merged, and Tobago's debt to Trinidad was cancelled. Tobago was administered by a commissioner, later a warden, appointed by the colony's governor. World War I was a global war centered in Europe. It began on the 28th of July in 1912 and lasted until the 11th of November in 1918. In the 1920s, the labor movement organized trade unions and pressure increased for greater local democracy and then independence. A new constitution brought a limited form of electoral representation to Trinidad for the first time. Tobago had had elections before, but only 7 of the 25 members were elected, and high property and language qualifications limited the vote. This did not satisfy the growing demand for political expression, which led to the 1937 labor disturbance, an increase in the number of elected members in 1941 and 1945. Universal adult suffrage. All right, I'm going to go here a little bit. We're going back. We just went into some general history of the things that was taking place in Trinidad around this period of time, ending around 1945. But I'm going to go here now into the actual carnival and the preparation of costume and the African influence on this aspect of carnival. This section is entitled The Building of Carnival Costumes and Its Origin. Jolly Masquerades of Sierra Leone and the Creole History, 51 of the Atlantic Rim Performance Arts, United African Company, all right, by Helga Krutenzinger. All right, referring to the costume as Ijo, observe that such costumes were primarily made by the Temni in an abstract form with a headpiece made of a wire structure covered with cloth. Concerning the Jolly costumes in both the Silver Collection at the Fowler Museum of Cultural History, UCLA, and Zoro University, Unity, wire working is a major technique in costume production that seemed to have been mastered by the Temni. Okay, now I mentioned earlier that the Temni were among the groups that migrated to Trinidad. And now what we are discovering is that the skill of wire bending was brought here by that particular group. In 1978, Pa Adikali Kibonkun Kamara II, a subhead to the temple headman in Freetown, King David Kamara, observed that the Ajo, as well as its spelling A-D-J-O-E, as well as it derived Irishola, which means fancy headdress, was now very small and almost extinct. The term Alikali was popularized among the Tem in the 1880s when the Tem chief, the Moruba Kindo, borrowed it from another chief. A turban was placed on his head, and if by magic he became Alikali, Temni youth at the time may have been inspired by this event and impressed by the power of the turban, which would help to explain why so much time and energy was invested in creating Alikali headpieces, and currently Jolly. In 1953, The sociologist Michael Banton estimated the existence of over 30 young men's fancy society in Freetown, of which Boys London was a part. Boys London, he explained, was formed along the lines of Ambasgida, a Temni-dominated society, so named to demonstrate that, like Europeans, its members were civilized. The name Ambasgida translates as "we are together," and by extension mean unified and civilized. According to Freetown elders, Boys London split into two groups, with younger members forming a new group called Small Boys London. They were impressed by a new mask costume called Ajo, after which they modeled their own production. In various conversations during the fireworks in 1978, Mr. Wills, then a member of the Crew Tribal Administration in Freetown, explained that Crew relationship to me. Born in Liberia in 1913, he recalled several social groups, some of which performed masquerades. He said that his people were very active participants in the establishment of friendly societies, many of which held masquerades. He asserted his assertion is backed by statistical evidence by Banton in 1957, who found that all the Freetown tribal groups that registered their societies in 1953, the Crew and the Temni, formed the most active group, with the Temni having 53, the Crew 47, compared to 35 by the Creole. The Crew organized fancy dress groups as well as bowlines and managing societies in which women wore uniform, fancy dresses as did the Jolly. But anyway, this reading goes into explaining some of the societies that came from Sierra Leone and Liberia, such as the Gelede Society, that maintained these parades with these masquerades. So it would seem that the Temni people of Trinidad would have been the ones belonging to these societies who brought this tradition of wire bending and the making of masquerades for celebration to Trinidad. Basically, this commences my reading. All right, what I just read there concerning the Gelede Society and the Mask and the Temni people and Freetown and Sierra Leone came from a document called Activating the Past. And the section of the document is the history and memory of the Black Atlantic world. The article was edited by Andrew Apter and Lauren Derby. All right. So now I would just give like a general synopsis of what I read, and then I may add a few things to it. Trinidad Carnival, of course, even though it was influenced largely by Yoruba culture and influence, would have had other cultural forces that would have influenced the carnival also. All right, but mainly what I would really like to say is that even though we are hearing of Liberia and Sierra Leone and the Tem and the Crew and all these different tribes of people, all of these people were basically Yoruba speaking people, with the exception of very few. All right, because of the proximity to the western part of Africa. So despite the fact that I would have named many different tribes from several different areas of West and Central Africa and even East Africa, most of these tribes would have amalgamated while they were in Trinidad, and they would have brought all their cultures together, including the Mandingos, who were Muslims. But beside them being Muslims, they also practice traditional religion, because many of the feasts as well as many of the practices that is held today as Orisa practice has in fact been influenced by other West African Central African, Eastern African tribes. Okay, things such as Saraka, which from historical records and research have shown that a large part of these practices came from Grenada, Guave, and on the little island where they practice where they have a big drum festival. Um, they also, in celebrating the big drum, they recognize many of these same tribes that were listed, that were spoken of. I think of lately I saw a video that was produced by Redman, where he was demonstrating the various rhythms of the drums that represent the various tribes of African people who came to Trinidad. I think also off Grenada, because the island is considered to be part of Grenada, but it's actually off Grenada. During the big drum celebration, they also honor all the different tribes of West African, Central African, and East African who had migrated, and those who were slaves in Grenada also. So in closing, I've read a lot of research here from various sources that sort of puts everything together to explain, firstly, what was going on in West Africa at the time around and after slavery. I also went into reading some of the information that spoke about the influence in carnival, particularly with the banning of the African drum and the introduction of what is called tambu bambu, which later on developed into the steel drum. The calendar rhythms, the stick fighting, the chantwells, which developed into calypso. To even go a little bit into that, what I would like to speak on is the fact that even during the times of slavery, you would have had singing taking place in the field during the cutting of the cane and the harvesting of the cane. Most of these songs were sung in typical West African style, where they were call and response type singing, as is still done today in Orisa tradition. There would be the person who would be the chanteur, who would be leading the song, and they would call, and then the audience would give a response. That is still today a very, very great part of African tradition that has been maintained. Traditional calypso used to also have some measure of call and response, where people would normally sing the chorus, and the artist or the chanteur would actually sing the verse a lot of times, which was done very what we call extemporaneously. They would just create these verses in the songs from the top of their head while working in the fields. The field songs would have been one type of area, or one type of songs that would be sung. At the end of the evening, when the slaves came off of the field and they would return to their cabins or whatever, they would gather and they would also sing songs that would, in most instances, be complaints about the hard work, about the master. And many of these songs would have been highly critical of master's wife, master's children, and various things like that. So these things would have influenced calypso in a profound sort of a way, because even in the area of calypso, we have different type of songs. We have the commentary, we have social commentary, we have the songs that